The second episode of research methodology is relating to the terminology, terminology. We need to know what kind of terminology we are using and what does it mean really before we can carry on in our research. So research terminology is important. Let's have a look at them one by one. We have the first one is called what's called model, which means a representation of reality. Framework, which is set of ideas and approaches. Theory, which is set of concepts to define and explain some phenomenon. Typology, which is typical model of the items tend to be found in relation to each other. Concept, which means ideas driving from a model or a framework. Method, which is specific research technique or empirical, whether it's empirical or experimental. Methodology, which is a general approach to studying a phenomenon, whether you are studying it qualitatively or quantitatively. And then finally the tools, what is at hand, recording devices, keystroke logging tools, or whatever tools you're using in your research. Now, what's the difference between method and methodology? And this is what we covered in episode 1, but I will carry it here as well. Chesterman says in 2007 that methods are the ways, tools in which one actually uses the tools that you're using, or develops, or applies, and tests. Not all of them at the same, one after the other. So uses and develops and applies and tests a theory, that's methodology, in order to reach the understanding it offers. And a researcher should consider using the research terminology and use them consistently. And that is really one of the most important elements. Now, what are the types of researches that are available? There are quite a lot. There is historical approach or type. But in general, we've got the quantitative research and the qualitative research in the main. And there's research which is by practitioners. Okay? And they can be related to, for example, ethnography here, or action, or survey, or causal comparative, correlational, or single subject you are studying, or experimental as well. This is another one. And of course, there's a content analysis. I'm just going to go through some of these, the type of research we need to know. What does it depend on, or what is it answering? What do we need to answer in the type of research here? Well, we need to answer what is the research question. We need to know what the research question is to answer it. And then the type of research depends on answering which method or methods are most appropriate in research. And what kind of data will be collected. And how will the data be analyzed? So you see, you need to know these things. You need to know what is the research question, which method most appropriate for your research, and what kind of data you're collecting. And also, how will the data be analyzed? How do you want to analyze the data? Also, what is the epistemological framework, i.e. the study of knowledge, as we seen these before. In other words, it's the logical system to be used and the nature of the research you need to know, the goal of the research, and also the ethnographic sense of the research. Now, the types of legal or logical arguments in this, there are 3 types of logical argument. The first one is called deductive. And that means moving from general to specific, top to bottom, sometimes they call it. Applying a theory to a specific text. You had a text and you are applying a theory. And that is called deductive approach, or deductive way of the argument. And then the other one is inductive, and that is moving from specific to general. You're drawing general principles or conclusions from specific texts. And of course, there's the last one, which is the abductive, which is reasoning and making inferences to the best explanation available. Now, of course, in the deductive one, you have the element of, you have a theory and you want to apply that theory to a text. That is a deductive approach because you're looking at the general, top, to the more specific, to bottom. And that is you are applying a theory to a text, to a specific text. That is deductive approach. There is also the inductive approach, which is moving from the specific, which is the text itself, okay, to the general. In other words, you are doing the opposite approach, which is from bottom to top. And this one, you are drawing general principles and conclusions from specific texts. You have specific texts, you're looking at them, and you're trying to draw from them some sort of principles and some sort of conclusions that you can come up with from these texts. These are really the major ones, the inductive and deductive. Deductive, general to specific. Inductive, specific texts to general. So you take a translated text already, you analyze it, and you come up with some conclusions from it. That is inductive. The deductive is the opposite. You have a theory in translation studies or any kind of area, and you want to apply that theory to a text. So you bring a text and you apply it. So in other words, you are taking from the deductive point of view, which is looking at the theories first and then applying them to a text. And that is the deductive approach. Now, what is the nature that also you need to worry about or be concerned about or focus on? The nature of the research. And there is either empirical research. What does it mean, empirical? It means to seek new data and new information derived from either observing or observation of data or from experimental work to support or disconfirm an idea through hypotheses. Of course, empirical, this is what it is. You are collecting the data and the information and you're taking it from an observation. You're observing something. You're experimenting. You're using an experimental work. And that is in order to prove an idea or through a hypothesis or not. The other approach is conceptual approach. And that is, it aims at defining and clarifying concepts to interpret and reinterpret the ideas and to relate concepts into larger systems or to introduce new concepts as such, or metaphor, for example. What are the types of empirical research that are available? Well, there are two types or three, actually two basically. The first one is called basic empirical research, which aims at acquiring new information or new knowledge. And then the applied, which is aiming at applying problems to real life. So there are these two approaches to the empirical research, and it is divided into, not onto, into experimental, which seeks to establish, let me fix the word in onto because I don't like to have errors there. It should be into. Okay, so it's divided into, as we said, about basic and applied, the two types, and then it's applied as experimental, which seeks to establish cause and effect relations, the cause and the effect in a controlled environment, often comparative. The other one is explorative. And this approach, okay, this empirical approach seeks to live an experience or explore a phenomenon through subjective approach or personal experiences. And that is the explorative approach. So experimental or explorative. Experimental means establishing cause and effect in a controlled environment. Explorative, which means that you live the experience, explore a phenomenon through subjective approach or personal experiences that you ask people about. You ask about their personal experiences. Now, the goals of research are really very important to know. If you are trying to be evaluative, and that means you are, there's under evaluative, you've got summative evaluation to establish the value of a particular initiative once implemented. And there is also the formative or process evaluation, which is to identify the effects of the initiative or to evaluate the delivery of an initiative. And of course, there's the action. If the goal of the research is not evaluative, it's action, which means that the action is leading to change by tackling real-life problems to produce action or knowledge like that which had helped stakeholders. The final goal of research can be ethnographic one, which explores cultural groups by understanding, describing, and interpreting their way of life through participants' viewpoint. Example study of the Finnish translation unit at the European Union. So you go and study that unit and see what the participants' opinions and views are. And this is the evaluative approach, of course. There is the evaluative approach. There is also the descriptive approach. Descriptive, you are describing the data and you are analyzing. Describing means what, where, when, and who. Describing, you're asking these questions. If you are going into the analysis, you ask the question why this is happening. So in other words, you're looking at the reasons behind the research or why it is like this, why it's happening in the research unit or the translation unit or any unit you are under study. But the evaluative is to see, you want to establish the value of a particular initiative which is happening in there. So this is really all the elements that are relating to the today's episode, which is relating to terminology that is used in research for today. So that is episode 2.